Hey everybody, Quantum here, and we just concluded the weekend of July 21st where we saw I think the fourth now Disney Lorcana Challenge in Fort Worth, I think that's Texas. Interesting event. What's kind of funny here is as we take a look at what won and what came second, I think these two players were actually first and second seed going into the event. If you look at the end of round 9, Chris Coy and Edward, I think it's Chu, or Chui, ended up in first and second place, and then they ended up making it to the finals where they played each other. So it looks like that going first advantage really helped, I think. Obviously, they're very good players, but very cool to see that out of the top 64, it was the first and second seed that ended up making it all the way to the finals. Now, again, I didn't watch every single match on the stream. It was a very long day. There was a lot of things going on that weekend, but we're going to just take a look at a couple of the deck lists. And what's interesting to note is with the upcoming errata to Bucky happening, you're going to see obviously this Bucky discard deck go away. It doesn't mean that Emerald Steel discard will go away or Emerald Steel in general, but it means that this version of it will definitely fall off. The Bucky is virtually unplayable afterwards. What's interesting to note is this is the second event in a row now for a Disney Lorcana Challenge where Ruby Amethyst has taken the victory. And what's interesting is you've seen some new tech, I guess, in this deck. There's two Sisu Empowered Sibling, which I believe Edward played in the finals to clear out double Ursula Singers on Chris's side, and it actually played a role in him just clutching out the match, following up with the Queen's Castle, because this card is like a pseudo Be Prepared, right? When it hits the board, it's just a character. So it's interesting to see that there's still some tech being played in this deck. Obviously, it has the Shift Target and the small Sisu. But with Ruby Amethyst being so dominant still towards the end of this format, just like it was, I guess you can say, in the last format and obviously in the Rise of the Floodborn format, will we see anything happen to this deck or the cards that are traditionally used in it, right? The Merlin Mim package since Rise of the Floodborn seems to be fairly staple. We've talked about this on my channel many times before, with the Madam Mims just being very overpowered for what they are, especially Madam Mim Fox. The Merlin cards just, people have been calling for GOAT to be banned since set 2 because you just can't play around it. It's inevitable, right? Do we need more lore drain cards or something like that in order to offset these things that can just kind of surprise go for game when you're trying to plan out your turns, right? You're like, oh, the opponent can't go for game, right? Maybe they have a shift target, they can shift. Even if they do that, they can quest for an extra 1 lore, they still can't go for game or whatever. But then they do something like GOAT cycle 3 times, right? Like play GOAT, bounce GOAT, play it again for 10 ink, or for 10 ink with the snake, and then you're just like, oh, well, there's 3 lore that I didn't account for, right? So these kind of things, what are we going to see happen with maybe, like a ban list or something going into the next set? But you did see Ruby Amethyst take it. It's very nice to see Amber Steel Song kind of once again coming to the forefront of the meta. I think that this deck is just always going to be a very strong deck. While it does suffer a little bit against the Sapphire variant, you can see that, 3 World's Greatest Criminal Minds specifically to deal with the Tamatoas, among other things, but mainly to just say your Tamatoa hits the board, just get it out of there right away. No item removal, right? No Benjas or anything like that. You're just playing the race game because Amber Steel Song can do that, right? Sleepy's Flute, we've talked about this before. You see the inclusion of 4 Baloo, right? So if, the opponent wants to play a Sisu and board wipe, if they want to play a Be Prepared or Madame Medusa or something, and this is the only target, like you're going to get some lore out of that race as well, right? So interesting adaptations. Lawrence also being played here. Just a decent body, 3 cost inkable, 4 willpower. It gets 4 strength if it has no damage. And the way we've seen the game progress, right, is that people aren't leaving things with damage on board. They're clearing things out right away. They're not saying, okay, let me damage this for 2 damage now and then I'll finish it off next turn. It's like, no, we're clearing it off right away. What's also nice about Lawrence in this deck is at a 4 toughness body, just like with Ursula, it's just bigger bodies along with obviously like the Robin Hood and even the Tinkerbell that you can use with the Rapunzel, so it's very strong as well. The Baloo can also, and even the Ariel can get like 2 damage on it. Rapunzel draw 2 off of that, so a lot of synergies with this deck. Very, very nice to see them come into first after Swiss and then second place overall. I really thought I did catch the end of the stream, and obviously the Steel Song player being first seed opted to go first for game 1. I think they won that game and then they lost game 2. I didn't see that game, but then on game 3 I tuned back in very quickly and I was like, oh yeah, like Amber Steel Song on the play, like they should definitely have this, right? Like their deck is so aggressive, and all it took was just kind of one bad sequence from the Amber Steel Song player, and the Ruby Amethyst player was able to jump on it and capitalize. Now, the chat was saying stuff like, oh, the Ruby Amethyst player was top decking really well, and they were top decking the cards that they needed in order to like specifically deal with the opponent's board. Like, there was a turn that I tuned in on where the Amber Steel Song player dropped double Ursula, and it looks like they were going to have a play next turn, but then the Amber Steel Song player just dropped like the Sisu 8 drop. I don't know if they top decked it, but like that was like the perfect answer to wipe out both of these Ursulas, for example. And then from there, like I said, it was just like Queen's Castles, and there was just like it's too much to come back from, right? Questing for 3, gaining 2 lore off Queen's Castle. Very, very interesting to see. And speaking of which, I went over that Ruby Amethyst deck, but Queen's Castle, I think, has been the card that has clinched many matches, and if not both the final matches in both this event and the last Lorcana Challenge event for Ruby Amethyst. So like I was saying, like market watches and Ruby Amethyst decks, like the Queen's Castle looks to be the most powerful card in the game right now. It's quite remarkable. Will that card get a nerf? I've talked about how Ravensburger may have made a misstep with printing very, very powerful locations in set 3 and maybe regretting it, as we've seen the design of those location cards change. We don't see a lot of passive lore gain and very powerful effects like with Queen's Castle, McDuck Manors, those kinds of things anymore. It'll be interesting to see what happens if Queen's Castle gets probably not an errata, but maybe even a ban. It'll be interesting to see, but very interesting Steel Song list. I'm a fan for Along Came Zeus as well to be used with that Ursula. Emerald Steel, I think, I could be wrong. Maybe I should have looked this up first, but I believe, actually, we can just look it up right now. What am I saying? Oh, no, we can't because they didn't update this. Ed faced, okay, so the Ruby Amethyst player did indeed face the Emerald Steel player, and Ruby Amethyst won. And then this was a mirror match. I remember, because this was the one that was on stream where I tuned in. And Chris obviously won this one, beating Oyola. Hopefully I said that right. Yeah, in the Amber Steel Song mirror match. So if you take a look at this Emerald Steel list, on 4 Hidden Cove, because they're really trying to play around the removal for Diablo, it looks like, and obviously for Bucky. Only 1 Robin Hood. I experimented with a list with less Robin Hood, but I didn't have enough time to test it fully. But yeah, like the way that this, like I can understand this line because this is the thought process I think with Emerald Steel, and obviously this doesn't matter too much with this deck going away, but the thought process I believe here is like you don't want to be drawing into your 1-drops later on in the game, and playing a lot of them hurts. Like Cove is more useful because it can boost up and play around removal of your existing higher cost characters. Interesting to note here that we've seen Ursula Deceiver of All kind of pop in and out of this deck. I think the kind of consensus was that you play 3 or 4 of them. This person opted to cut back to 2. They're on 4 Donald Duck. This is tech that Zan actually talked about. And I talked about this a little bit in set 3 where I said, I regret not playing this in my Emerald Steel deck, and I was playing Daisy Duck instead on the, obviously not the Bucky discard version, but like the more like forceful discard version of Emerald Steel in set 3. And I was like, I really missed the card draw. Like Donald Duck would have been great. So you got Donald, you've got Beast, and you've got Diablo. 3 different draw engines in your deck. I don't know how I feel about this, like technically, because again, in the mirror matches and stuff, like I guess you maybe just don't play it, but it gives, the Exerting Diablo extra draws as well. So you're going to give your opponent a draw 2, even though you draw 2 during your turn, then they draw 1, obviously during their turn for turn. So they're coming out ahead if they have an Exerted Diablo. So there's a little like weird like nuances that you have to pay attention to with this deck, but obviously this person made it work. On 4 Tinkerbell in the end, I was playing 3 in mine. I think I cut it to 2 though, but this card I think definitely showed its worth in the end, because just having that big threat on board, making your opponent scared to exert stuff if they can't directly out the Tinkerbell, was very important. 2 Brunos, you've seen this card fluctuate from 0 to 4. I do think that the hard removal that you can get off Bruno when you discard the hand is very good, but since you're playing Donald Duck, if you can't constantly remove the opponent's hand, like the Bruno loses a little bit of value there. What's interesting is I do think that putting Prince John back in this deck might be worth it, but only if you're really running like the more heavier discard version with Sudden Chills, because obviously you can see this person is not running Sudden Chills. They're not even running Zeus or Grab Your Swords. They're just straight on the like very efficient songs for Ursula and Diablo to sing, and then 2 Brunos, 4 Baboom, and then 4 Hidden Cove. My guess is they use the Cove with their own Diablo to out the opposing Diablos, right? And then they just get a couple of draws off of their Diablo, and then once the Cove goes and their Diablo goes, because it crashed into the opposing Diablo, that's kind of it. Obviously they have Babooms as well, but the Hidden Cove tech looks to be working out pretty well for this person there. Let's take a look at looked another Chris Oyola Steel Song list on the Piglets and the Smee, and on the Golden Harp. Very stark contrast to the other list we just looked at, as well as 4 Lawrence, 3 Ursula on the Cinderellas, which I don't believe was in the other list. No Queen, which is interesting. 1 Grab Your Swords, only 2 Zeus on the Perdita and the Cinderella. So I experimented with Perdita and Amber Steel. It was okay. Like, this is why they're playing obviously a bigger 1 and 2 drop package down here, with Perdita being able to bring back Ursula to sing on next turn, or Cinderella, or Harp to quest. If you played a song, this Harp is a big threat technically. But again, it's very underwhelming later on in the game, I think. But a good utility package, I guess you can say, just simply because Perdita brings back the singers, right? And then it enables all of your songs up to Along Came Zeus. Your Whole New World and Grab Your Sword still need to be sung by Robin Hood or Ariel, right? You definitely don't want to be singing with Perdita. You definitely want to be questing with her if you can. So, interesting list. A lot more songs, it looks like. If we just quickly go back and take a look at the first place list, or second place list, sorry. They were on the Queen. I do think the Queen is really good. Obviously no Perdita package there, but interesting to see Perdita coming back into the meta a little bit with Amber Steel. We take a look at another Emerald Steel that came, I think this was 5th place now, so just missing out on top 4. 2 Sudden Chill on the Pegasus Shift line, 3 Ursula Deceiver. So again, another variation. You can see that the Donald Duck seems to be adapting into the deck quite well. A lot of people are opting to run a couple copies of this at very least. Again, just because the card draw is so important here. And if they Medusa or something, the Beast, you should have a Donald Duck as backup or something. Anything, because you just need to keep the gas rolling in this deck. Like, that's how this deck functions. Because this deck gets into top deck mode too, right? Once you run out of gas, if they out your Diablos, they out your Beasts, right? Or damage your Beast. Like, Donald needs hard removal, because the Beast, you can damage it or you can hard remove it and stop the draw. Diablo is very easy to out, right? With other steel spells or actions. Same with Ruby actions like Brawl. But the Donald is a little bit harder. Yes, it can be brawled and stuff too, but between these 3 draw engines, you're going to need a lot of specific removal in order to out them all, right? And it can be very hard. And with Donald having 5 toughness as well, it's also a little bit harder to out without like a Maui or something. The only Sapphire Steel list in top 8, I really like this list, and I kept saying that, this is probably one of the best decks in the format theoretically, which I do think it is fundamentally, like when you look at the mechanics of how this deck is built. The issue is, I think this deck just gets outpaced by Ruby Amethyst, and I guess you can even say to a certain degree the lines of play that Emerald Steel have. Even though this is supposed to be a really good matchup for Sapphire Steel, the lines of play that Emerald Steel have, they can just get rolling so much quicker. And if you don't see very specific things to out, like the Diablo, or if they get the Diablo on a Cove and you can't boom it right away, or you don't see your Zeus, or you have to use your Zeus on a Diablo, it puts you so far behind, and you're just playing a lot slower than your opponent. Whereas if you can get to the mid and end game with this deck, it's probably one of the strongest decks, if not the strongest deck in the game. I think it's a little bit better than Ruby Sapphire even. But the issue is your first couple of turns are so slow while you're trying to build up ramp, and you can only do so much to mitigate opposing strategies that they just end up running away with the game. And then by the time you do set up turns 6, 7, 8, it's just the game is too far gone and you're just going to lose anyways. You're constantly reacting to what your opponent is doing, and you're eventually going to run out of answers. You can only have so many Grab Your Swords and Let It Goes and Tinkerbells, right? That can do so much before your opponent just ends up questing for game once they're at 14, 15, 16. So it is a hard fought match, I guess, with Sapphire Steel. It always, I know because I play this deck quite a bit, I know it always feels like you're almost playing against yourself to a certain degree. You need to have a really good hand for that specific matchup. You need to mulligan for that specific matchup, and if you don't know what you're playing against, or you're going in blind and Swiss, let's say, it can be a little bit of a detriment to you. But then even though if you know you're going up against Ruby Amethyst or Emerald Steel or something, there are specific cards you want to keep and specific cards you want to mulligan per matchup, and then it's really down to, well, am I going to be able to see those cards? Now, to be fair, right, the Whole New World even the Beast Tragic here, a lot of draw engine here, right? The Hiram, like you should be able to draw into what you need. The issue is these cards are expensive, right? And they take time to set up. And you don't really have a lot in order to mitigate your opponent's game plan early on. Like you have some Babooms, you have a Zeus. Yes, you can develop a Smee, but for the most part, you're trying to ramp with Mickeys, with Fishbone. You're trying to play items with Fortisphere, Popsicle to sift through your deck, draw cards. So I can see why this deck can still struggle in the metagame. It might get a little bit better with the next set, Shimmering Skies. We'll wait and see. Now, one deck that I've been talking to my friend about, the person that I playtest with, and I said, I really think this deck is going under the radar. I think it possibly could be one of the best decks in the format that nobody really ever played, is Amber Emerald Discard. We did see some of the crazy tech being used, some stuff like using the Muses to bounce back your own aerial and replay your aerial to just get more songs and keep the gas rolling. You've got draw engines in Diablo and Prince John, which I do think Prince John is one of the strongest cards in the game as well. Simply because it's just insane card draw. When you have a discard focused deck, you're sudden chilling, you're bare necessitiesing, you're Ursula, you're forgotten meing, you're Brunoing, you're doing all these actions, you're discarding at least 1 or 2 per turn, and the Prince John is just going to get you multiple cards back in your hand. This deck functions off of I need resources, and I'm going to consistently out your resources. I built my deck similar to this. I'm not a big fan of the Sir Hiss in particular, but obviously him and this person, Jordan and Zach Bevins, were on this because it's an evasive quester. It can sing the songs on 2, and it's a thing that deals with Diablo directly, right? So it has a lot of good things going for it. The issue is that 1 willpower makes it like susceptible to every form of steel removal in the game. But I mean, that's just a thing you have to accept, maybe. I would also be playing 4 Under the Sea, and instead of 4 You Have Forgotten Me, I mean, I know the interaction of John on 3, You Have Forgotten Me on 4 is insanely strong, but Daisy Duck, the one that comes into play and discards a card, is also an interesting option to look at. I guess if you're running Crikey or Cricky, you don't need to. But the reason why you'd want to run Daisy is because on tempo, like it gives you another body that you can sing together, the Under the Sea. The Under the Sea is the card that makes this deck, though. And when I was watching Zach Bivens' top 64 match, I think he was in a really good position to win his match against Emerald Steel. The issue was the opponent, I think, was on like top deck mode, but they drew 2 cards, and then they Ursula Deceivered the Under the Sea that Zach Bevins was planning to play and literally like wipe out, I think, every card on the Emerald Steel player's board except for like an Aladdin, like a 3-cost Aladdin, which he probably could have got rid of if he painted the roses red. And that Ursula Deceiver sniping the Under the Sea out of his hand just made him lose the game. So this deck, because it is the only real form of hard removal, this deck really does depend on the Under the Sea to control the board state, and if it loses that, it does kind of fall apart a little bit. Yes, it has Muses, but you can't get enough utility off of this if your opponent goes wide enough. Also, what's interesting about this list is there's no Kita, and it is kind of I don't want to say a gimmick, but it is a very easy thing for your opponent to play around. If they see the small Kita, they're like, yeah, I'm not going to let him shift big Kita, reduce the field by 3, and then use that big Kita to sing Under the Sea. So in this scenario, you want to have the 8-cost characters in total on board already. Play the Kita, use your other characters to sing Under the Sea, and that in and of itself is a way to wipe the board. So I did personally buy 2 more foil Prince Johns to complete my foil playset. I bought 2 more foil Kitas. I think I paid like $6 for the Prince Johns and like 12 for the foil Kitas. So I think that was really good value, and I just picked them up. But yeah, overall, I really am a fan of this deck. It can fall apart. It does suffer if it gets board wiped, but because you play such an aggressive discard game, even when you're on the draw, you can usually choke out your opponent. And we talked about Emerald Steel doing this as well, where you want to play a play pattern or lines of play specifically that you don't want to just sudden chill right away. You want to wait until your opponent has used up a few cards and they're down to their final like 2, 3, 4 cards, and you're like, okay, I'm going to force them to discard their whole hand now. They've got 3 cards left. I'm going to play the You Have Forgotten Me and then sing the Sudden Chill, discard your whole hand. You're only on 4 ink. Like, good luck. You're in top deck mode. Half your deck is unplayable because it's more than 4 cost or whatever, or 3 cost. And that's where I choke you out, right? This deck is just a more aggressive version of Emerald Steel. So I really do think this is a strong deck. What would make this deck, in my opinion, a little bit better in the tier list, make it a little bit more competitive, is if it got another way to hard remove options other than Under the Sea. Because, like I said, you need to see this and you need to keep it in your hand. If it gets sniped out by an Ursula Deceiver or a Bare Necessities or anything else, like a Whole New World discards it, you're in big trouble. Like, this is your only form, and for that I think you should be playing 4. I think it is mandatory. But again, these guys obviously do an amazing work in the Lorcana challenges, so I'm not trying to criticize. The final deck I want to take a look at, because I know this video is probably getting kind of long here, is Ruby Sapphire. This deck has kind of fallen out of favor a little bit. You can kind of see, a bunch of different iterations of this deck. Like, you don't normally see Vitalosphere, you don't normally see Pegasus, or the Great Stone Dragon, one-ofs, random one-ofs, which can be decent when you do see them because, these are technically items that can be recurred with Tamatoa even. But I think that this deck in general, similar to Sapphire Steel, is that sometimes you're playing against yourself. You're trying to ramp aggressively. You're fighting, drawing all these uninkable dead cards in your hand. You may not want to play Fishbone Quill all the time so that your uninkables are kind of just dead. And then if you're playing against discard and you have a bunch of uninkables, now I have to play my Fishbone, which is going to dump my hand even faster. And if I don't see my card draw, there's a lot of things that have to kind of go right for this deck in order for you to kind of just capitalize. Now, that being said, you can afford to get a little disadvantage in the beginning, because your top end is so strong, and this is where this deck kind of excels above Sapphire Steel in this regard, in that it's like, yeah, that's fine if you snipe up my entire hand. All I need to do is top deck like a Hiram or a Sisu or a Be Prepared, and as soon as I do that, I'm back in the game, right? I wipe out your board and I'm just going to stop top decking my bombs, because look how many we play, and I'm just going to control the game from there. Against Ruby Amethyst, which is obviously the considered now, I guess, one of the best decks in the format for sure, you have the Hercules to deal with the Queen's Castle. You have the Lucky Dime as an unanswerable answer, or an unanswerable tech card, or I guess it's not really a tech card because the deck kind of plays around it, but plays for it, I should say. But a card that Ruby Amethyst cannot interact with. But until then, right, are you doing enough to slow down Ruby Amethyst? If they know they're against Ruby Sapphire, they just end up trying to race you. And to be fair, I mean, Styler, I think is what his name is called there, but I think this was the guy that ended up making this deck right at the start of the format for Ursula's Return. I think he has the most popular deck on Dreamborn for red-blue. Putting in the Sisus and whatnot. And so good to see that he was able to perform. 12th overall, not bad. If we take a look at just one more Ruby Sapphire list, let's take a look here. So not necessarily too different. It seems like the Vitalosphere is being included. Now, I talked about this when this card was released. I said this card looks really nice, simply because I know the interaction between White Rabbit's Pocket Watch and Aladdin was so good in the first chapter. Vitalosphere, I understand why you're not playing Aladdin, right? Because it's kind of an old card, but 8 ink isn't that bad. You have this already on board. You just need 8 ink. You play the Aladdin on 7 ink, and then you activate Vitalosphere for the last ink, and then you get a 7/5 Aladdin that can swing into something and swing lore +2, -2, right? 3 Queen of Hearts, which is interesting to see. On the 1 Great Stone Dragon tech, 1 Judy Hopps. And then I'm a big fan of this Dig a Little Deeper card as well. A Sing Together for 8, which, a Grammatala and a Maui could sing it if they're on board. A Medusa and a Grandma or a Judy could sing it, that kind of thing. Or even a Madame Medusa and a Queen of Hearts. But the Dig a Little Deeper is very interesting. Look at the top 7 and put any 2 cards into your hand. I bought a couple of foil ones of these because I do think this card gets better over time. Just one though, it's an uninkable, but again, you can Fishbone it. Again, a lot of uninkables in this deck as usual. Only 1 Hercules instead of 2 and 3 Mauis, and then only 3 Dragons instead of 4. So interesting to see how the deck kind of evolved over time, because you definitely were not seeing things like Vitalosphere and Queen of Hearts, Great Stone Dragon, that kind of stuff, Hercules in the deck before. But that's it for the big, the top 4 decks of the format, including Amber Emerald, which, like I said, I do think should be pushing its way up into the top echelon of the format. Emerald Steel, right, is going to fall off a little bit. Ruby Amethyst, for sure, is up there. This is the only Ruby Amethyst in top... Okay, well, there's one more at the bottom here in top 16. This one is, again, just pretty standard. Oh, this guy's also on the Sisu. Interesting. So you got both Ruby Amethyst players in top 16 on the Sisu. Just extra removal here. Very interesting to see. But yeah, sorry. Sapphire Steel, Sapphire Ruby, Ruby Amethyst, Emerald Steel. And then we had an Amber Emerald and an Amber Steel Song making its way back into the top end of the end of this challenge. We'll see where the format goes. Obviously, the metagame is going to change once Shimmering Skies comes out, but all in all, this was an interesting meta that we've seen kind of shape up here as we our understanding of the top 4 decks in the format, but also, it's nice to see Amber kind of breaking through again, because I do think Amber is kind of underrated and overlooked right now. I think, there wasn't an Amber Ruby Mufasa deck that made it, but I think in Swiss there was one. Yeah, I think it was this guy. In Swiss, this guy was like top 8 after Swiss, which is a very interesting list. Still running the Pongos. I'm not a big fan of this Gaston, but they ended up making it work. I like this Mickey. And these cards here are very interesting. My friend was playing this against me on tabletop. We went 1-1. We only played one series. But the Nessus and the Stitch being big bodies at Quest is very interesting. I'm a big fan of this Mickey, though, because if you get this off of the Mufasa, you're just like, what? You're going to Quest for 4 next turn? That's crazy. 2 Chernoblogs, too. That's wild. But anyways, guys, this video is getting kind of long, so let's go ahead and wrap it up. Hopefully, you enjoyed this very quick look at the meta review from the Lorcana Challenge Fort Worth over this past weekend. If you did enjoy it, you made it this far, thank you again for watching. Quantum is out.